Wonderful. My name is Scott Warner, and I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago, zooming to you tonight live from, I have a second home in Spring Green, Wisconsin, so I'm in Wisconsin right now, but my heart is still in Chicago. And we have a wonderful talk tonight. We curried the favor, pardon the pun, of these wonderful authorities on Indian food, a mother-son duo, Dr. Jyoti Mukharji and her son Auyon Mukharji. They are experts in cooking. They're experts in Indian cooking. And they also, Auyon is an outstanding musician. His group has been referred to by the Wall Street Journal as two Simons and two Garfunkels. Did I get that right? You're two Simons, or are you the two Simons and two Garfunkels?
I'm just one guy, but I think the group has garnered that accolade. Yeah, when I'm teamed up with my friends, then it works out better.
Wonderful. So we're having Jyoti and Auyon are going to give us lots of food for thought, a buffet of food for thought. And for our dessert item, Auyon is going to play some of his music. He sings worldwide with his group. And anyway, we can't wait to hear that. So tonight's talk is this mother-son duo are going to talk about the historical and cultural context of traditional and diasporic Indian recipes. They're basing their talk on their new wonderful book, Heartland Masala, an Indian cookbook from an American kitchen. And cooking, let me tell you a little bit about them briefly. Cooking instructor Jyoti Mukharji chose 99 of her favorite recipes to build the core of Heartland Masala. Her recipes hail from throughout India, with a special emphasis on the cuisines of Punjab and Bengal. And to complement his mother's recipes and recollections, culinary historian Auyon Mukharji offers a generous helping of culturally focused vignettes. So he's, as I said, we've got a full buffet tonight. So Jyoti Mukharji is a chef, teacher, and retired physician. She's a retired pathologist, which would be great if anybody gets food poisoning. She can figure out easily what killed us. And she immigrated to the US from India in the late 1970s and began teaching weekly Indian cooking classes out of her home in Prairie Village, Kansas, but in 2010. And she's been publicized widely she may be in Kansas, but she's known far and wide because of her teaching. And Jyoti has since welcomed several thousand students into her kitchen. And Auyon Mukharji, again, he's a musician, a writer, and culinary historian who spends most of his time thinking about food. He studied biology at Williams College and was awarded a Watson Fellowship in 2007 to study self-expression in folk music. Since 2009, Auyon has toured with and cooked for the indie folk band Darlingside, and we're going to hear a little bit more at the end. He otherwise finds time to work in and around kitchens and farms in both his hometown of Kansas City and his adopted state of residence, Massachusetts. We have tonight literally one of the world's great authorities in our audience on Indian cuisine, Colleen Sen. She's written so many books about Indian food. She's practically a celebrity in India when she goes on book tours there. And Colleen lives right in Chicago in Rogers Park. So I've known her for years. I forget how famous she is, but Colleen is the one who suggested Jyoti to speak for us. And I asked her when they're finished with their talk, can you chime in and ask them some questions? Colleen will lead off live with the questioning, what a great thing to have that authority with us. So let the curry begin. Go ahead, folks.
Thanks so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. My name's Auyon, as Scott mentioned, and huge thanks to Scott and Kathy for the lovely introduction. I will let my mom kick things off by giving a little background on how she got started with her cooking classes, which were kind of the reason for this whole book project getting started in the first place. So, Ma, why don't you start?
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to this beautiful session. I have been, as Scott said, I am a retired physician. I studied medicine in India, then came here to the United States with my husband, and I was doing my residency. Then I got pregnant, had our firstborn, and at the age of about 3.5, he was diagnosed with an offshoot of autism. And at that time, after a lot of checkups and tests and the whole thing, I was at a point where I had finished my residency. I was finishing up my fellowship, and I decided to quit medicine so that I could be home with him on his team and help him to be as independent and as self-sufficient as not a normal person, but as any human being with a lot of challenges. And I have to tell you that today our son is 42 years old. He's a successful citizen of the United States. He works. He's been holding his job for the last 19 years. He lives with us at home. He is our joy and our pride. And he has been blessed with 2 younger brothers. One of them happens to be Auyon, who also are extremely, extremely inclusive of him since they were in school, high school. And so so I used to volunteer quite a bit at our oldest son's school, as well as at the where Auyon and his younger brother were going to school. They were in a private school. Our son was in a public school system, oldest one. And so when he was ready to graduate, I decided I would it was time for me to volunteer in the community and do some philanthropic work to help people in response to what had been given to us to raise our son. And I happened to stumble on Head Start, which is where I volunteered. And as you all know, probably, that it is for underprivileged children, and 75% of the funding comes from the federal government. 25% has to be raised by the board in volunteer hours, in grant writing, and in fundraisers. So a year after I started volunteering, I was asked to join the board. And at that time, the board, one of the fundraisers they did was a golf tournament. And the year I joined the board, they decided to add a silent auction. And at that silent auction, I decided to donate an Indian dinner for 8. I did it for 4 years, and every year we do it. I would invite 2 of my friends from the board, and it so happened that the same people would buy it every year. We'd raise the price, they'd buy it again. We'd raise the price, and they'd buy it again. And so the 4th year we were doing it, one of these friends happened to be of Greek descent, and she said, you know, this is so much fun. I think I'm going to donate a Greek dinner next year for the next year's auction. So she went and told the board member who used to run the auction, and this board member came to me and said, instead of doing 2 dinners, why don't you do a cooking class? I said, I've never done one in my life. She said, you know, there's always a first time. That was October of 2009 when my cooking class sold. I did my first class with these people on February 6th, 2010. It was that day I realized that I had achieved nirvana. My passion to cook as a mother and my passion to teach as a little girl, which had long been forgotten, just came together that evening. And I was like, I was in 7th heaven. So when these people left, my husband, who was hiding in the back, he saw the glow on my face and he said, why don't you do this as a hobby? Well, that was 2010. Here I am in 2025. I have been teaching for 15 years now. in our home kitchen. I do not teach in a commercial kitchen. I do not advertise anywhere. It's a word of mouth business. I'm not on social media. I have no website. And I have, when I left on this book tour on 2nd of September this year, my count was 6,500 people through my kitchen since I started teaching in 2010. And it has been, to me, food is love. And this is my way of sharing my love with the community that has done so much for us. And 3-4 years into my teaching, my students asked me to write a book. And they said, we want you to write a book, but we have one request, that you must put a picture of every recipe in that book. So my vision of the book was, get some recipes together, get some pictures together and spiral bind them and get the book out. In the meantime, the media had been very kind to me. So they were writing articles, and some of the journalists would come to the kitchen and actually attend the class, and others would say, would you submit an article? And so I love to teach, I love to talk, but I don't like to write. So that is when Auyon was doing most of my ghostwriting. And so when this thing about the topic of the book came up, I asked Auyon, I said, would you help me write this book? And he fortunately agreed and said yes. And I'll let Auyon carry on.
Yeah. Hello, folks. Again, my name is Auyon, and it's such an honor to be getting to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us. I did say yes to my mom asking me, but I wasn't serious. I was not actually interested in writing a book with her. At that point, the band that was kindly introduced earlier was touring probably 120 dates a year, something like that. So I was on the road a lot, and the prospect of writing a cookbook with my mother in between tour stints was just objectively a terrible idea. So I told her, but my mother is a very powerful woman, and one that is very difficult to say no to. So rather than saying no, I said yes, but before we start, you need to send me all the recipes that you want in this book. And I knew that my mom was going to have a lot of trouble culling her recipes. So I figured that was a high enough bar. We were never going to sort of achieve the activation energy necessary for that to happen. So I was fine in that I had said yes, and also fine in that we would never have to write a book together. But then it took her maybe a year and a half, but she did end up sending those recipes over. And by that point, it was a 2 frogs in boiling water situation, where the temperature was slowly turning up and we were not able to get out. And so we ended up just writing this book. And the book ended up being called Heartland Masala, which we released in September. And it took a long time to write, much longer than my mom had assumed, like maybe a year. Her vision was like the spiral bound thing, mediocre to poor iPhone photos, get that thing out in like a year max, and then like keep producing. She'd somehow soon would become a cookbook factory and just keep producing books every year, because she had a few friends who were on a very tight cookbook schedule. But early on for me, I realized that writing yet another cookbook of family recipes from an upper middle class Indian kitchen was of very little interest, in that it's a lovely genre. It's a genre that is pretty full. There are many lovely books already in it, and the idea of adding another one to it was not at all of interest. So I started thinking a lot about what I could do that would sustain me as a writer through that process. Talked to a lot of friends, and read a lot of cookbook criticism, and eventually landed. I'm very pleased to have landed on culinary history and context. And typically, this is the part I would not be digging into the reasons for this, but since this is a culinary historian's Zoom, I'm very pleased to talk about some of the writers who influenced that. So one of them is a lovely man named Jose Relat, who holds the enviable position of taco editor of Texas Monthly Magazine, which is a job apparently you can have if you're Jose Relat. And Jose also has a wonderful book called A Field Guide to American Tacos. This is a field guide. It's not a cookbook. It's just a guide. Like when you wander out into the world in search of tacos, as you should do, these are the tacos you see around. There are tacos from there are Tex-Mex tacos, there are K-Mex tacos, there are Northern Mexican tacos, there are all of these things that are even Indian, like Indian Mexican tacos. And he describes it's sort of a slightly revolutionary way of thinking about food, at least given in the current context of a lot of accusations of cultural appropriation, where there are these ideas that only one group owns any kind of food. But in Jose's book, he's talking about how this is dynamic. It's constantly changing, and as anyone who studies food, of course, knows, that is how food is transmitted. It goes from one culture, is received by another, and is changed, and then moves back sometimes to that original culture. And it's this completely unchartable, beautifully unchartable phenomenon. And what Relat one phenomenon that Relat talks about or describes is the abuelita syndrome, which is this idea. Abuelita in Spanish is little grandmother. And it's this idea that many folks with a Mexican grandmother will say, that food that I see there that's being called Mexican food doesn't look like what my grandmother cooks. What my grandmother cooks is real Mexican food. Anything that doesn't look like that is not real. And there's absolutely nothing wrong, of course, with having a single arbiter of, or having a family, a matriarch who sort of defines your familial cuisine. That's a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing. No one is arguing at that. But the idea that they are, the issue with that scenario is that there are many Mexican grandmothers running around. Some of them have gone rogue. Some of them are doing wild things. And the idea that any one of them is an arbiter of sort of what Mexican culture is or isn't is ludicrous. Of course, like there's so many different things happening at any one point. And so, and that idea and a related idea so there's the abuelita syndrome, and then there's this related idea by a writer named Arnab Chakladar, who writes under a blog called My Annoying Opinions, but which has some whiskey writing reviews and some really trenchant cookbook criticism, mostly South Asian cookbook writing. And he describes this situation within Indian cookbooks, especially, where a lot of the literature happens to be family recipes, which there's nothing wrong, again, with a family cookbook. But when most of the literature is family recipes, and most of those families are upper middle class, you're getting a very narrow, like what the overall effect of that body of work is a very narrow band. It comes from a very narrow band socioeconomically, and also perspective-wise, just in general, that also ignores often the broader history of those dishes. Because when you're writing a family cookbook, the main point of research you're doing is talking to your grandparents or talking to your great-grandparents or asking your parents about what they experienced. You're not usually looking deeper into the history. There are, of course, many. I'm painting with very broad strokes here, but in terms of like popular Indian cookbook culture, that's a phenomenon that this other writer identified. And so when thinking about what we would do with our book, knowing that what we were doing was in some sense part of the very problem described by these writers, where we're going to be doing a book of family recipes that my mom teaches. In balancing that out, my hope was by presenting slices of cultural context and history, we would be able to correct for some of that. And that ended up being the shape of the book. And so I also should mention, I spent several years researching this book. I do not have a degree in history, so I am experiencing right now a solid amount of imposter syndrome as a culinary historian, speaking to a large group of people who are culinary historians, especially Colleen Sen, whose work I admire so much and have gotten to Colleen's work I leaned on very heavily. So I did check in. My younger brother is a PhD historian. He studied the McKinley era and is a professor at the Naval War College. And I got his blessing I asked basically, like, if I don't have a degree, am I allowed to use this term? Because I studied it, but like, I don't know, there's no institutional backing here. And he said that it was fine with him. So at least as far as he's concerned, I was very pleased to get his stamp of approval. I hope to maybe at some point get yours as well. But know that although I'm not a PhD or even master's student or grad, I did take my research seriously. My previous life was as a biology researcher in college, and I did a thesis. And so, although the book itself, our cookbook, does not have footnotes in it because that felt a little heavy-handed, I do have a list of 100+ footnotes from my research on our publisher's website that is not presented in the sort of traditional, very strict format, but is at least traceable. And frequently footnoted is Colleen's excellent scholarship. So again, I came to this decision that I was going to be doing some historical work and presenting some of that context, and I'll show you all some of what those essays look like. But that took some work because I was, again, a musician by trade, had some experience studying biology, but was not a historian by any means. So it took some time for me to just like undertake this course of self-study, years. Meanwhile, my mother, who had expected things to just happen in about a year, about 3 or 4 years in, she started getting quite concerned and threatening her own death. She was just like, it's possible that I could die before this thing comes out. She was and is in pretty good health, but she was just explaining this possibility that it could happen, which is true for those of you who are in collaborative projects. Know that that's a thing you can throw out regardless. If anyone could die before the project is done. It didn't actually speed us up. It did stress everyone out and was extremely unhelpful. But she, that's a trick, a trick of immigrant, maybe Indian mothers. But she did employ it. I did eventually finish the research, and that produced the shape of our book, which was to have the backbone is my mom's recipes, and the head notes, which are the pre-recipe blurbs, and standalone essays are a mix of things, but a lot of focus on cultural context and historical essays. And I should also admit, so I did do plenty of research. The only bit of primary research I did was on chai, and there's one mini essay on chai that I'll show you all. But the most of it was secondary. So just reading folks like Colleen and Lizzie Collingham and other excellent writers who have done, and K.T. Achaya, who've done beautiful work on Indian culinary history. So yeah, I think maybe talking a little bit. So yeah, I think maybe jumping right into the cookbook might be a good idea now, just to show you all a little bit of what this book looks like, just because it is, and I can talk a little bit more about some of the specific essays too. So I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. So can you all see that? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great, excellent. Okay. So yeah, this is our book. And so one thing about the book too is that we have both photos and illustration. And the photos, my mother, again, when she described how her students had said photos were a very important part of the book for them to see the finished recipes. For me, illustration was a really important thing for a few reasons. One is that I think illustration works better than photography often for instruction, in that you can highlight certain things and present things in a different way. Another is that because there was going to be so much of this historical context, and I wanted it to feel like an accessible book, to have something to lighten that was very important, to show that we took ourselves seriously, but not so seriously that we sort of aren't playful about it. And so all of the essays that I mentioned, those historical and cultural essays, are accompanied by an illustration. And our illustrator was a lovely man named Olivier, who's based in London, whom we got to work with. But the way we balance those two is we have the illustrations of the primary visual currency of the book, and then in the middle is a series of photography, or all the photos are in one group right in the middle of the book. Which, for those of you who used to use who use cookbooks from decades ago, there used to be color plates, which is where the whole book was black and white, except for the color photography right in the middle, and that was a cost decision or cost-related decision. For us, it was not cost since we have color throughout, but it was to keep those visual languages isolated. So just because often I think they can take away from one another, the illustration and photography. So in our book, we do have photography, but it's all in the middle, and the rest is in illustration. So let's see, I will scroll down here. Olivier did a really nice job of illustrating us too, which is real fun. This is me reading some books. I'm trying to see if I don't think I have Colleen's there, but it was one of the main ones I was reading. And we also have some comics like this, where sort of showing this is more the instructional world of things that I was describing. But as far as the history portion, so this is in context, this is a more playful one, a note on courses, which describes how within Indian cooking for most states, again, so Indian cooking, many of you may know already, of course, but to talk about something as broad as the cooking of India is to talk about something as broad as the cooking of Europe, in that it is extremely broad. It's very hard to make any sweeping generalizations. While most of Indian cooking is presented all at once, there are a couple states where it is coursed, but we sort of make that. I try to caveat most of the things, most of the generalizations. Over here on the left side of the page, you can see a lot of the photography section that's coming up, and then most of the essays fall in the back half of the book. So I'll skip to the chai one, just because that's one that I described already. And so this is our note on masala chai, which describes, and this is one of the things that I think is emblematic of one of the things that was most delightful and instructive for me in researching Indian culinary history, which is how some things that we think of as very Indian are millennia old. The eggplant, for instance. The eggplant is a nightshade that is native to the subcontinent. The people of India have been eating and cooking and perfecting eggplant cooking techniques for a very long time. Chai, which also is very much an Indian thing now, is quite recent. There are some tribes in the northeast of India that have been eating and fermenting the tea plant for a very long time. But as far as a national drink, as a drink that is consumed sort of by the subcontinent, that is a much more recent phenomenon. One that was chai, the drink tea as we know it is Chinese in origin. It was introduced to India by the British and didn't really become the drink of the masses until the 20th century, so very recently. And Olivier did a beautiful job doing a riff on a British chai ad there. Another one that I quite liked is this piece, which is a very brief description of describing the using a what's the word, proscription against drinking, and a very specific prescription against drinking, along with associated punishments, to illustrate the fact that clearly people were drinking because they needed to get this specific about it. The Dharma Sutra is a series of Sanskrit texts that date back to the first millennium, prescribed a specific punishment for someone from the priestly class if they deliberately consumed alcohol, or if they accidentally consumed alcohol. And there's a separate punishment if they just sniffed it on the breath of someone they were hanging out with who had consumed alcohol. So clearly a lot of people were boozing, and it's so much enough folks that they needed to give very specific descriptions of each of those punishments. And then additionally, we discuss a bunch of history, or at least context and use for within our spice glossary at the end, which was a lot of fun for me to write. Yeah, that I think is a solid, just overall view of our book. There are some of the other, and some of the other essays get into less Indian specific stuff and more diasporic history. So this piece on the 70-year-old roti quesadilla recounts the history of, so in the early 20th century, a bunch of Punjabi migrants landed up in California and were doing as migrant laborers. And due to a combination of sort of the circumstances of immigration at that point and some nativist legislation that was passed very soon after they arrived, their wives or partners did not join them or come with, or even prospective partners did not come with. And as a result, these Punjabi men ended up marrying Mexican women. And this is at a point in California history when there were anti-miscegenation laws, or laws that prevented people from marrying outside their own race. Fortunately, at that point, Punjabis and Mexicans were the same race, brown. So they were able to get married to each other. And as a result, there was this web of Punjabi-Mexican marriages and families and communities that existed throughout the Southwest. And there were a handful of restaurants. One of them was called, I think, Rasul's El Ranchero, and that had both Punjabi fare and Mexican fare, with this restaurant specifically had one crossover dish, which was the roti quesadilla, which was actually a different flatbread, a paratha stuffed with cheese, and which I loved as an idea. And that, I think, again, is some of that telescoping of how we think about food history and fusion. And it's very tempting to think about fusion as a thing that you find now in the streets of big cities when you walk around and see people doing wild stuff. But in truth, this is a thing that has been happening as long as people have been smashing up against each other in different communities. And to know that the idea of a Mexican-Indian crossover is a thing that there's documented from 70 years ago is, I think, a really beautiful thing, and helps put a lot into perspective as far as like how to think about food culture and how dynamic and constantly changing it is. And yeah, that was, again, a really helpful thing for me when considering how to write about food and how to write also, I think, framing of our book. And so all of this helped describe sort of what our book is and isn't. And I have an essay on authenticity here, which I'm not going to read in its entirety or anything, but the upshot is, or the gist of it is that authenticity is a very slippery word, especially, again, when you're talking about something as broad as the cooking of India, wherein every state. So that analogy that I'd used earlier about the cooking of India being as broad as the cooking of Europe, if not more so, is apt also for a linguistic reason. So when you think about moving through Europe, you cross national borders and you are all of a sudden experience a new language. The same thing in India. Sometimes you're even experiencing a new script. And oftentimes, when you, especially from north to south, the difference between those languages is huge. The languages of North India are Proto-Indo-European, which makes them long lost cousins of English and Spanish, which makes them the languages of North India are more closely related to English and Spanish than they are to the languages of South India, which are Dravidian, which is a mind-blowing thing. And the same goes for food as well. Like there are vast gulfs between the way that people eat in different parts of India. The definition of a samosa changes when you move from region to region. There are people who will tell you that a samosa you've brought from another part of India isn't a samosa and should not be considered as such. And of course, they're correct and they're not right. Like it's all of that is true. There are many. A great uncle once wrote to me, "There are many Indias," and I think another truth is that there are many authentic samosa recipes. So with our book is very much not the last word in Indian cooking. It is just one snapshot. Like I think authenticity only makes sense. This is, again, just called from the history reading that and the wonderful scholars who I was lucky enough to read and spend time with. But authenticity only means something when you are talking about a very specific time and a very specific place. And for us, like this book is authentic only to our kitchen, our diasporic Indian kitchen in Kansas City. It is a very, very narrow slice of this vast universe that is Indian cooking, that is constantly changing, and it's just our small part of it. That is all it is, and not by any means, and nothing more than that, I think. And so that was I'm so grateful to all of the historians whose work I was able to lean on to sort of put this together and present it, and because not only for the research and the specific essays, but also for how much it shaped the way that the framing of this book, which was, I think, one of the most important parts for me, is how to think about why what we're doing matters. And it matters both not at all and a lot, in the same way that the way that history is put together is certainly there are historians who are doing work to look at a broad range of things, but in order for them to have things to look at, there need to be people who are documenting what is happening on the ground at any one point in any one household or any one place. And so for us to get to contribute to that with our book is really an honor, and to also to be able to within the book call on the work of historians who have done like Colleen and Lizzie, who've done such wonderful work, was such a thrill and really fun. I in high school, history was my least favorite subject. And it is remarkable to me that I'm getting to hang out with you all right now, referring to myself rightly or wrongly as a culinary historian, and getting so excited about it, because it is a thing I deeply love. It has changed the way I eat. It has changed the way I think about food. It changed the way I cook and changed the shape of this book. So thank you all for being part of this community, and especially thank you to Colleen.
And Auyon, thank you so much, both of you. I had, before we bring on our great culinary star, Colleen, to grill you on some things, I'd like to ask you just a few questions. Can you give some examples of the kinds of foods some of the titles for the recipes, or just describe some of the foods that you have in your book, that some of your favorites. Well, they're probably all your favorites, but pick
Oh,
up favorites.
yeah, totally. So we are, Ma, you can also, if you want to let me know ones
Yes.
that are your favorites, then I can scroll through and find them, and then I can fill in, Ma. So if you want to talk about, Ma, give me a dish you want to talk about.
How about goat meat?
Yeah, that sounds great.
What is that again? What is the name?
Goat meat
Oh, yes.
is what we were raised on. Chicken came much later, and in the north, my husband is from the eastern part of India, Calcutta. Their staple is fish and rice because there's so much water, and they're right on the Bay of Bengal. But where I come from, the north, it's landlocked. So it was goat meat that was very, very special. And we would have it a couple of times a week, and it used to bring a smile to our faces and warmth to our heart when we would eat goat meat.
And you can see here on the screen, so for each recipe, the mutton aloo korma is Hindustani, which is Hindi and Urdu, which are two related languages. One written in Devanagari script, the other one in Arabic. But we color coded these two dots on either side. We coded each of the recipe titles so that you know what language you're reading. Most of them are either English or Hindustani, but there are a few South Indian ones, there are a couple Bengali, and so we wanted to code it accordingly. But I'd mentioned we have a head note. So this bit is my mom's head note. I have another head note here that gives a little bit of context on the term korma, and then the recipe itself, followed by yeah, it's a long recipe. This one takes some time. And an essay that accompanies this one is a note on beef, which is a brief discussion of beef eating within India, which I think yeah, was an important thing for us to include, I think, from an equity standpoint of pushing back on some of the stereotypes that folks have about no Indians eating beef, when in truth it's specifically a Hindu thing and a relatively recent Hindu thing. And so talking about some of that was important for us with the book. Ma, give me another recipe that you want to talk about.
How about the eggplant recipe?
Yeah, which eggplant recipe?
Bangan aloo.
Yeah.
Or bharva bangan too.
Bharva bangan here.
Yeah.
Cool. And so this is another one where you can see the same color coding. This is Hindustani again. A great example of our man Olivier's illustration style. And this is, again, eggplant, which is, so there are many nightshades that are used in Indian cooking these days, most notably probably eggplant, potato, and tomato, and the chili pepper, of course. And of those four, only the eggplant is native. The other three are all New World plants that didn't come over until the Columbian exchange. And so there's something especially fun about including eggplant dishes in this book. Scott, any other questions?
I've heard, I've had a number of Indian cooking classes from some wonderful Indian teachers in Chicago, and I was blown away by that because I used to hate Indian food. I thought it was some of the worst stuff I'd ever eaten in my life. And I found out as a kid, I had eaten in some Indian restaurants, and the reason I thought the food was so terrible because it was. And I found out years later from Madhur Jaffrey, the Julia Child of Indian cooking. I heard her speak at an Indian restaurant in Chicago. This wonderful cookbook author, who's also an actress and a sculptor, said she was explaining how Indians cook at home at a restaurant. I guess the restaurant scene isn't so big in India, if that's correct.
It never used to be. Now it is, but it never used to be. Yeah.
Yeah, so a tricky thing. So there are a few things there, and I'm excited to hear Colleen's take on this as well. But so within like strict Hinduism, there are a lot of rules around who cooks for whom, when you should eat, who should be eating food cooked by whom, et cetera, like how people need to be dressed when they're cooking for Brahmins or people of the priestly class. All to say, like the more rules there are, the less likely it is, like the less the less conducive that is to a really great hop-in restaurant scene. I think people have been eating fried things on the sides of roads for a very long time. But in terms of like restaurant culture, if you are very concerned about the dress and caste of the person in the kitchen, it's going to make it pretty hard to go to a restaurant. It's like sort of if you think about dietary restrictions on steroids. And then as far as the food that you were probably eating when you were younger, so this is changing now, especially in larger cities. I'm sure in Chicago, in New York, I know, in the bigger cities in California. But the Indian restaurants that existed, if you can think from like 90s into the early aughts, they all had a relatively standard menu, a very similar menu that seemed like it was the same, just the translation of the same thing moved around in different places. And those restaurants were all themselves translations of like the Indian curry houses of London from the 1970s, which were themselves very much like based in like the food of Punjab, where my mom's from, but very much an Anglo riff on that. So including things like jalfrezi and mulligatawny soup, things that are very much Anglo-Indian. And I say that with no disrespect. I think again, there are many Indias. Anglo-Indian cooking is one form of Indian cooking that is beautiful and has many great things, and also has some things that I don't like as much, but that can be said for, you know, stuff from all over the place. So I'm not saying Anglo-Indian with any condescension, but it is a very specific thing, and one that proliferated within the restaurant, or like that was sort of what an Indian restaurant was for a very long time in the UK, and then again in the US, and that again is changing. You can find more regional stuff. You can find South Indian cooking. You can find things from like Keralite places. Yeah, some really wonderful things all over. But those restaurants were a very specific thing that I think if it didn't suit you, or if they weren't doing a good job, yeah, it probably wasn't great. But definitely different from the way that Indian cooking occurred in homes across the subcontinent, because again, it was Anglo-Indian.
And my last question, I'm being Colleen's warm-up act here before she grills you. But one last question. Again, eating homemade Indian food or taking cooking classes, I realized how delicious the food was. And again, Madhur Jaffrey said, yeah, and a lot of restaurant food is horrible. That's why you didn't like it. But is there anything especially healthy about Indian cooking, home cooking, or unhealthy? Are there unhealthy aspects of delicious Indian cooking? And yeah, if either one or both of you can answer that.
May I answer that?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll
yes.
follow up if that's okay.
All right.
So I should add.
We constantly have a debate on this, Auyon and I, and my husband joins in too. But so, you know, in my classes, I have people who come to learn Indian food because they want to eat healthy. They want to change their dietary habits. And there are definitely a lot of things that are healthy about Indian cuisine than not healthy. The healthy stuff is the lentils, the beans. You can be totally off. You can be a vegetarian and not have any kind of meat and yet get your protein intake. We are vegetable rich. So there is a lot of vegetable in the Indian cuisine that is made as side dishes, as or in the main course, and with a combination of the lentils, beans. So the way they are cooked, you know, they can be, the way they would be cooked in the restaurant is with a lot of oil, but at home, when we do home cooking, we will use limited amount of oil. So the food is not greasy as it is in the restaurants. And that is why, that's where I come from in saying that definitely it is healthy, it is vegetable rich, it is protein rich, but not animal protein. We are talking of plant protein rich. And the unhealthy part comes in when we deep fry snacks, you know, whenever we not it wouldn't be lunch, dinner, but in between we have high tea, we will have tea snacks, and those are deep fried. Now, even in the deep frying, there is the healthy and the unhealthy. A lot of the snacks that we make at home, they don't soak up oil. They are deep fried, but they are not dripping with oil. So for me, being naughty, once a week or a couple of times a week, and having the deep fried foods is not a bad thing. But with the spices that we use, we are masters of spices, and the spices we use, that's what makes the Indian cuisine so rich, not in a
Indulgent.
not in a creamy sense, but rich in terms of health benefits. Every spice that we use in the Indian cuisine is loaded with health benefits. And right now, the Western world has caught up with the turmeric. And turmeric is we have been eating turmeric for, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of years. And it is included almost in, at least in 70% or 80% of our dishes. And ginger, garlic, the dry spices, coriander, cumin, fenugreek, anise seeds, these are all just loaded with anti-inflammatory properties, digestive, and being great for aiding and helping in the digestion, adding to the fiber. So to me, Indian cuisine is very healthy, as long as, and the reason why I would never say that go eat Indian food in a restaurant and you're eating healthy food. It would not be the right thing to say, because most Indian restaurants, actually all Indian restaurants, will add cream to their curries, especially if there's some vegetarian curries and some meat curries. But the traditional Indian cooking does not employ the use of heavy cream, and they add it because the Western world loves the sweetish, smoothish taste of cream. Because the Western palate loves it, they add it. And so restaurant food is definitely, in my view, unhealthy, but home cooking is definitely loaded with health benefits. And it's like in any cuisine, there will be some things that are unhealthy to eat, but then there are other, you balance it with those that are healthier and good for health. So that's my take on Indian food.
And I have to preface, anytime my mom and I disagree, I have to let folks know that she is, of course, correct, and I am offering an incorrect rebuttal that is not right. So just want everyone to know that what I'm about to say is incorrect. However, in this case, we actually align mostly. So the only caveat I would give, Scott, is that we are currently living in 2025, when the definition of health is wildly different depending on whom you speak to. My mother is a physician. She aligns very closely with whatever the New England Journal of Health suggests, which is wonderful. And New England Journal of Health, as all science is based on the literature. The literature drags a good decade or two behind what people, like the vanguard of what people are researching, just because that is the nature of scientific literature. It takes a long time for these things to come through. And so it takes a little while to catch up. Depending on who you speak to these days, you might find someone who believes that health is eating no meat. You might find someone who believes health is eating only meat. You might find people who are doing it, and everything in between. But I do think that for exactly the reasons my mom described, that learning how to cook Indian is going to help you, can be a very helpful tool in pursuing whatever your health goals and dreams are, largely because of the spices that my mom mentioned, which we avoided getting too deep into the scientific, or really dipping more than a toe into the scientific benefits of spices or the health benefits of spices, mostly because neither of us are experts on it, and it's such a rapidly changing field that it didn't make sense for us to include it in the book. So we gave more cultural context and ways to use those spices, along with a note that if you are curious about this, there is a wealth of information out there in the internet for you to dive into. But spice usage, I think the beautiful thing about spices is, of course, they are healthy and do all sorts of wonderful things to your body. And the reason that generally the reason that is the broadly understood reason for why spice usage correlates to cooking in hot and humid climates currently is that their antibiotic and antifungal properties help with curbing bacterial growth and fungal growth in food. So and that goes for what's happening inside you as well. But in addition to the spices themselves being great, they also make pretty much, if you use them well, which does not take a huge amount of work to learn how to use spices. There are a few tricks which we go into in the book. You can make pretty much anything you're eating taste better. So whatever your definition of healthy is, if you learn how to use spices properly, you can apply that to whatever it is you want to make taste better and eat the way you want to. So for that reason, I think it offers vegetarians, meat eaters, whomever, a lot of and when I say spice, we're not only talking about chili pepper, of course. It's one very specific, the capsaicin heat is one very specific thing, but all the spices, the black peppers, ground mango, cardamom, ginger, turmeric. If you learn how to use those, you will just become a better cook. And truly, I think that what this gets into, Scott, is that I think if you know how to cook, you can eat as healthily as you want, because you will make things that are healthy taste good. And I think spices are a very useful tool in that. And since Indian cooking is so spice laden, it's a thing I would highly recommend for folks who are looking to cook more. And one of the beautiful things about that too is there are some cuisines where getting the freshest, best ingredients is part of the cooking. If you think about like rustic Italian cooking, rustic French cooking, where it's like you have this beautiful capon or this beautiful escarole from the garden, and it's very easy to make it taste great. That's wonderful. And like within India, people are taking like dried lentils and rice that may not be of the highest quality, but you can make it taste pretty incredible with a judicious use of spicing. And so whether you're using excellent ingredients or things that you're a little more limited to your pantry staples, you can do a lot with a little bit, which I think makes it, if you are inclined to cook healthily, spices like Indian cooking will help you on that journey, I think.
Well, thank you so much for this savory information. So Colleen, could you please come on down and take it away?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have to say that I think this is one of the most beautiful cookbooks I've ever seen. It's just breathtaking. The design, the layout, the photography. I can just see how much thought and effort went into it. And one thing I like about it is you don't take anything for granted, which cookbooks always take something for granted. They assume that, we know things. And one thing was onions. I mean, how long you have to cook onions when you make Indian food? It's something that they don't realize. It takes a long time to get them right. And the other thing that I read, and I just burst out laughing, was the turmeric monster, which, because the other day I was making dal and I left it. And of course, what happens is everything spills all over this is just a gorgeous picture. I really laughed at that, because this is something you really have to be careful about. And cookbooks never tell you this. I mean, they just assume we're all going to be, and I cook a lot, and even I do that. And my husband, who's Bengali, so he was looking at it and he was very excited, because you have a recipe for mishti doi. And mishti doi is a very Bengali dessert, and which I just love. I don't know if I would make it from this, but it was really interesting to what pains you went to kind of to replicate the way that this it's simple yet it's complicated dessert. It's basically kind of I guess you kind of call it baked milk and yogurt, and then it has with kind of jaggery, and it just has a wonderful flavor. I just thought the book was great. I wanted to take one issue with the healthiness of Indian food, because today I was listening to a bit on YouTube. Actually, it was on diabetes in India, and there was a young Indian American doctor, and she was being interviewed, and one very negative part of Indian food is it's very carb rich. And she went through in a typical Indian meal in North and South India and looking what was carb, and the average protein consumption per person in India, and of course this is across all social strata, is only 25 grams a day, which is much short of what you need. And what happens when people, they're short of protein, they try to make it up by eating more carbs, and not necessarily sugar, but rice and wheat and things like that. And vegetarians have a problem. Now, of course, in India, there's not many vegans, so people would eat dairy products. Some vegetarians even eat eggs, but it is hard, and you have to be careful, I think, if you're planning a vegetarian diet, to really make sure you do have enough. I mean, you can get it from lentils and the complementary rice and beans, but it is an issue that you have to watch. I wanted to ask you one thing, and I'm asking you this because it's something that I know our members are interested in, because I've talked about it in the past. And it's how you brought this book to fruition. Now, I think you didn't do the typical route of writing a proposal and sending it to publishers, but I think I was looking, searching about the people that did put it together, and it seems they have a really excellent team. So could you tell us a little bit about the whole process of getting this book out there?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Colleen, such a pleasure. Colleen and I have exchanged emails, but haven't actually met face to face. This isn't, of course, face to face, but it's such a pleasure to see your face. I'm looking forward to getting to do that at some point. Thanks so much for all the kind words. And also your note about the carb stuff is absolutely true. I think it was very pleasant for me to read a little more about. You mentioned your husband is Bengali. Our ancestral diet, like my dad is Bengali, and the Bengali diet specifically is one of, I think, the scientifically the word they use is shittiest diets in terms of like rice, sweets. Bengalis love sweets. There's some fish in there too, but it's a huge amount of sugar. And then that compounding all of that is, of course, the epigenetic effects of famines that have been studied by folks, where the way that Indians hold on to visceral fat is deeply problematic. So yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't go to say that like Indian food is healthy in general. It's more if you have a vision for health, Indian cooking will help you. Indian cooking tools can help you with it, but I wouldn't suggest like necessarily eating like an Indian person would every day and calling it a day for sure. So thank you for that.
Yes. Oh, actually, my husband's diabetic, and his approach is he likes sweets so much. He eats sweets, but he practically eats no carbs at all, no rice, no bread. He's so strict, but he will indulge himself because he says
sounds
really
like a good
enjoy
Bengali.
it.
Yeah, totally. That sounds very.
If I may interject, and that is a trait with the Bengalis, that they love the sweets, but they also love their rice. The average Bengali cannot do without rice. And if you have ever, I'm sure you've gone to Calcutta and seen the average person there has a mound of rice. I mean, there is more rice than there is, but that's not how most of the Indians eat. That is so typical of Orissa, Bengal, some of those neighboring states, Assam, where they're rice rich and fish rich. So they have fish as a minor accompaniment to the rice.
And now, Colleen, that excellent question you posed, I'm going to, I've been writing, I'm staying off of social media for this cookbook release, and instead I'm doing only writing a newsletter, and my mom and I are touring it live. And so for those of you who are more curious about anything related to the book, if you look up Heartland Masala HQ, which is a newsletter, it's free. I've been doing a lot of writing around all of these things. And one of our early ones is called On Publishing and Trying Again, which kind of digs into this in a slightly deeper way. But I'll give a brief bit of it now. And that basically is that I'll stop screen sharing for right now and just go back to this. So, but yeah, if you look up that newsletter, Heartland Masala HQ, that will get you to a lot of writing about the book and how it got put together. But my mom and I had dreams initially of this book being published by one of the big cookbook publishers, like the Chronicle, or I don't even remember the rest of the names, but there are a handful of big deal cookbook publishers, and thought I wanted to see ours on the shelf with one of those little imprint stamps on it. And I spoke to, but I also had a very specific vision for what the book was, which again is a pretty atypical cookbook in that it's got history, it's got illustrated characters, it has photography, it has a flying unicorn that we have for one of the illustrations. Like, it's got some pretty wacky stuff, and this was all part of a pretty specific vision. And also, I should mention that my background in music, my band is aggressively protective of our music. We write the way we want to write and produce the music we want to produce, and then we put it into the world and sell it. But we tend not to be doing things when a producer or a distributor says, like, you know what is really selling right now? This kind of music. You should make something like that. Like that tends, we're very protective of our creative agency. So that's the mindset I was going into with this. And I sent our stuff to a few agents. So the typical path is you send a pitch to an agent. There's like, you send a proposal, and mine was illustrated by another friend and had sort of some of the spirit of like what the book was going to be. We'll put together a pitch deck, and no agent bit. And one agent whom we ended up becoming friends with, named Sally Ekus, EKUS, who writes a wonderful newsletter.
I know who she is. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. She writes a wonderful newsletter called Not So Secret Agent, for those of you who are thinking about book deals, that has a lot of great information about the publishing industry. She's very
let me just interject. Sally Ekus is the gold standard with as far as agents and publicists. So yeah, please go ahead. But that you couldn't mention anybody better.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She's become a dear friend. She moderated one of our release day chat in Northampton. But we're huge fans of Sally, and she generously sat down for a consultation with me, and basically told me this. She said that our book seemed very cool and very interesting, and it was going to be very hard for us to land a publishing deal given its shape, because publishing is a notoriously risk-averse industry, especially cookbooks, and especially Indian cookbooks, somehow. And so given all that, she said there are two things that you could change. One is that you could change, either you or your mom would need to have a national food platform, which neither of us had. My mom has a regional food platform. My band is a national entity, but like those two things, I would need to like write for the New York Times or do like some Saveur articles or whatever, which I wasn't opposed to doing, but doing it on spec in the hopes of landing a deal, such that 3 years later I would get a cookbook deal. Again, my mom was threatening death like 4 years ago, so we're already in risky business. So given all that, that was like maybe not the best move. And then Sally said the other thing that you would probably have to change is you would have to have it not just be your mom's recipes. That's like too narrow and specific, given that your mom isn't already a national thing. And that was very edifying for me, because at that point I said, great, I was willing to maybe do the national food platform thing, but this book is my mom's recipes. So we're not going to change that part. So if that's the thing that's going to prevent us from getting a deal, we will do it ourselves. And I'm very pleased to self-publishing, to do it at a high level is an expensive endeavor, and I'm very pleased that we were able to do it. And by we, I mean my parents, because I play music for a living, so I certainly did not fund this project. But I started looking into self-publishing, and that's how, through that process, got connected to a designer named Frances Baca, who also has an excellent design newsletter. For those of you who enjoy the cookbook design, we didn't end up working with Frances, but she introduced me to the person who would end up illustrating and photographing our book, whom I reached out to. And then somewhere down the line, when I had a few connections already, Sally introduced us to a couple folks who do hybrid publishing. And hybrid publishing can mean a lot of different things, but it's basically a cross between self and traditional publishing. The self-publishing part for hybrid generally is that you as the author take on the risk. So with self-publishing, with strict self-publishing, you take on all the risk and you hire everything a la carte. You find an indexer, you find an editor, you find a photographer, you find an art editor, all these things. So that's self-publishing. But the hybrid model, you are still funding it, but the traditional part of the hybrid model is that you're working with a company that is fully stacked. So you're working with a company that has an editor and someone who's looking at timeline stuff. There maybe even have distribution. You have an indexer, you have all these things, and someone who's telling you what deadlines you need to be meeting, which again is super valuable if you are not used to the industry or within the industry. And I have a lot of experience doing large-scale projects for music album work, but it's every industry is its own thing, of course. And one of the main reasons we wanted to work with this specific distributor, or excuse me, hybrid publisher, which the Collective Book Studio is what they're called, is that their distribution is through Simon & Schuster, which is as legitimate.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. And so distribution is one of the pieces that is almost impossible to get as an independent
Absolutely.
self-published author. That's not the case in other industries. Like in music, like my band does not have a label. We choose to be our own label, but we hire out distribution, and that's easy enough. But within books, cookbooks, that's not a thing that's very easy. You can get your stuff on Amazon, but getting it into bookstores is much more tricky.
Yeah.
And as far as a bookstore is concerned, though, when they see our book, they don't see, or they might see the Collective Book Studios and imprint, but the first thing they see is that we're distributed by Simon & Schuster, because that's how they get the book. And so they just like added on to the Simon & Schuster catalog that they're already filling out every quarter. And so in their eyes, we are as legitimate of an entity as anyone, which is really nice for us. And so again, what we had to do there was take on the risk. So I'm very pleased to report we sold through our first print run of 6,000. We're ordering our second one already, which is great. Yeah, really nice. And we're still a long ways away from breaking even, given how much we invested in this project with the art and all the things. I have faith that we will make it there in a year or so, but it is an expensive endeavor for sure. But if you have the wherewithal to do so, you get agency, you get the latitude to make the book of your dreams, which we got to do. And truly, this is the book of our dreams. Like I think we've heard so many horror stories from other cookbook authors who are an author, but their publisher insists on the photography being stock, or their author insists on the recipes being written this way, or the author or the publisher insists on all of these things, which would be so frustrating for me to have my name on a book and have it be not my vision. We got so little pushback from the Collective Book Studios. Part of that is them being wonderful folks who had faith in our vision. But part of that also is because when you're funding the thing, it's a different conversation. I can remember like maybe 2 or 3 very small things where I got real pushback on a thing that I wanted, and all of these are so small that they're not even worth talking about. Otherwise, this book, we got to do whatever we wanted. And I'm like, that feeling is so gratifying. So I'm really grateful that we got to do this. Again, it's the result of privilege of circumstance and how this played out, and the fact that we had the wherewithal to finance it. But that's how we ended up getting this book out, and why it's also in like Barnes and Nobles and bookstores all over.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I really think, I did a self-publishing book once, and I know culinary historians asked me to talk about, everybody was interested, and a couple of the members did the same thing. So I think this is just what the market really needs. And Scott and I, who used to do freelancing for magazines, and I think you said once that what we get, we must make 15 cents an hour or something. All the time we would spend writing an article and get $150 or something. So you don't write about food to make a lot of money unless you're Muttered Joffrey or somebody, I think.
Let me just add to what you just said, Colleen. I was at a food writers conference, and one of the most esteemed cookbook authors in the nation, Rose Levy Berenbaum, who wrote the Cake Bible, which is now in its 60th printing. I was talking to her about how much she made, and I was so shocked when she told me how little she made. This is on freelance articles. And I said, "You are so famous, and that's all you get?" And you know what she said to me, which changed my whole view of everything? She said, "But aren't we lucky to be able to do what we love?" So on that note,
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. I mean, my books are even more obscure than cookbooks, their history. So, but I think it's just gorgeous, and everything about it couldn't be better, really.
And how do we get the book? Best way to order? Just look it up online and find it.
Yeah,
they sent me a copy.
Colleen gets a copy. Colleen got a hand-lettered copy because of the amount of her work that I leaned on for it. But truly, Colleen, you are as much a part of this project as anyone, and it's like making me buzz to hear you say such nice things. So thank you.
Well, she's the one who recommended you too.
She's the reason I'm here. Also, we're here. Yeah, thank you, Colleen.
Well, we bong stick together. That's
appreciate it. We need to hang out and eat food together sometime.
That's very well known.
Yeah. So. Verg, I think, had asked a few things, one of which was specific stores or websites. And so for us, it truly, like, anywhere you want to get it is great. We tell folks your local independent bookstore is really great in that the more that local independent bookstores hear about us, the better. If you have to get on Amazon, that's still fine, in that Amazon numbers, as much as we despise Bezos and everything that he's doing, are meaningful statistics. So it's like, if you need to do it, don't tell us about it. And it will actually do good things for us too. But truly, I think since we've invested in the distribution side of it, Like there was a world in which we were self-publishing and doing it all ourselves and sending people books. I'm glad we didn't do that. It would have been a much lower ceiling. We probably would have made our money back sooner, but it would have been a much lower ceiling. Since we've invested in the distribution part of it, truly wherever you can find it, get one. And that's great for us. And it is available all over from all the sites. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you have a local, especially in Chicago, so we just did a book talk at 57th Street Books, which is the sister shop of Seminary. But their City Lit is also a great shop. There's so many places in Chicago that you all have. So any of those shops. And then Berg also mentioned that they would love for us to tell the story of Heartland Masala and Everything Cookbooks, which we just recorded that podcast, and that I think is coming out in the next 2 weeks or so. But we had a great time speaking with a couple of the folks from Everything Cookbooks, which is really fun. And I'm just looking at the chat too. Peter asks, do we have side or sauce suggestions in assembling a meal? We do have in the book a few. So there are truly, we do suggest think outside the box for all of this stuff with the meat dishes. Traditionally, they're served over rice, but they're great as tacos. They're great. They're great as one component of a different meal. Like our masala Brussels sprouts is a thing that I'm going to suggest people make for Thanksgiving. So think about using these things in different contexts. However you typically eat, think about how you can use these things in those contexts. And at the end of the book, we have a list of some menus just to give you a sense of things that could be put together. First also, this is our list of further books we lean on and otherwise love, and Feast and Fast by Colleen Taylor-Sin is right there, Reaction 2015. And then on the other side of the page is the sample menus. And these are more involved things, but I mean, so we do have suggestions in it. In all of the head notes to Peter, we do suggest ideas for ways this can be used, a dish can be used outside of Indian cooking. I also will mention one thing that is one of the most important, or one of the most fun parts for me to write, was the spice glossary, which I mentioned a few times and we alluded to. And the spice glossary includes some historical and botanical context for a lot of the spices. But I think most importantly, the spice glossary also has, for each spice or ingredient that we have listed, a way to use it outside of Indian cooking. Because our dream is that you assemble a spice cabinet as a result of cooking a couple of these recipes, and then you use those spices for stuff that have nothing to do with Indian cooking. That is the best way for you to build up a vocabulary, some facility with these spices, and use them both inside and outside of Indian cooking. That's our dream. And so an example of that is tamarind chutney, or tamarind, a lovely sweet sour flavor, really good as a chutney, also very good on vanilla ice cream. And so that's the world of things that we're suggesting within that spice glossary that will hopefully get you more excited to play with things.
Also, the meat curries taste very good on pasta, on risotto, on orzo. So
any starch. Yeah,
yes,
we did. So one of the great joys, we did one of these in Chicago. Those of you who know the restaurant Spinning Jay in Chicago, we got to do a really, really cool dinner there where the chef, Dinah, took our book, and I'd done this with a few different restaurants, mostly in New England and Kansas City, and then in Chicago as well, where I sent a chef whom we love a copy of the book and said, use this as inspiration. You do not need to make the dishes exactly. In fact, we would prefer you not. None of these were Indian restaurants. Also, I was sending them purposely, or working purposefully with restaurants that were not Indian, because I wanted to sort of see what other hands did with this cooking, which is I'm very excited about a question that just came in the chat that I will respond to. And in all of these restaurants did different things. One restaurant hewed very closely to the dish, to the dishes in the book. This was a woman who primarily cooks Japanese, Spanish cooking, and she made our curries just right on. It was very cool. Other places did all sorts of wild stuff. One person served a lamb curry over a saffron risotto that was wonderful. And truly, what a buzz to see just some of the same stuff we were talking about just now, which is how earlier in this conversation about how much food changes. And in different hands, it does different things. And that is a thing, rather than yelling cultural appropriation every time we see it, which is a thing that happens more often than I would like. Just celebrating when that happens, celebrating that smashing and changing. Certainly there's reality, cultural disrespect is a problem. Certainly not citing your sources is a problem. But the idea that we can't take food and play and do all sorts of things to it is that's not a world I want to live in personally. And I'm so pleased, and I would be so excited for you all to take this book or any Indian cookbook, forget ours, just and play. A couple questions in the chat. One is a question about curry. Indian curry versus what's used in Jamaican recipes. I am going to admit first, ignorance. I don't know what defines curry within Jamaican cooking. I can talk about it in an Indian context. So within an Indian context, and we have a couple essays in the book, I'm not going to dive super deep into it right now. Within an Indian context, curry is not a flavor. It is it is a genre of dish. Like you have soups, you have salads, you have curries. Curry is a dish with a spiced sauce, basically. You can have the idea of curry powder is very much a Western thing, like that's an Anglo thing, and that has now spread to other places. So because British sailors introduced it to Japan, curry is also a flavor in Japan. That may be the same in Jamaica, and I suspect it might be that curry is a specific or a constellation of specific flavors. But within India, the word curry, when it's used on a menu, means like a sauce. It doesn't denote a specific flavor. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different curry flavors or curry powders, like spice blends that are specific to different regional dishes. So I suspect it is different. And Catherine, you had a question as well?
I did. And it goes deep back into earlier in this conversation, but there was a discussion about goat.
Mm-hmm.
And the word mutton was used to describe goat. And mutton to me is mature sheep.
Yes. So
not goat.
Yeah, this is an issue of, for any of you, those of you who are botany nerds, the problem of having Latin names and common names for things. We're in different, like the word blueberry means a different thing depending on where in the US you are. It refers to a different species of plant, which is a very confusing thing. The same goes for the words like mutton, where depending on where you are, in South Asia, mutton can refer to both, I think, goat and sheep. But in other parts of the world, including the US, mutton generally refers to sheep. So we used it, and I will also add
generic.
Generic thing, but I also love, Indian English is a different version of English. It is very much intelligible to those of us who speak other Englishes, and it has its own vocabulary and sort of specifics. And the way the word mutton is used in Indian English is different from the way the word mutton is used elsewhere. So that's what that is.
Okay, so when I was a child, you could buy mutton most of the year, and only like in the spring you could buy lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved my grandmother. When she served mutton, that was not a good day. And my aunt even was worse because she coached us to spit it into her napkin, run to the bathroom, throw it in the toilet, flush it away.
It away.
But here's one of the ironies. It's difficult now to find true mutton.
Yep.
And I have been told, because I kind of want to go back and revisit this and see if it was really all that bad or it was just where I was at that point in time.
You know, the older the animal, the tougher the meat.
Yes.
Mutton refers to an older sheep.
Right.
Then it is going to be tough meat. And that's why you were asked to spit, maybe, because it's hard to chew that meat.
My aunt just didn't like mutton. And as much as we all loved our Oma's cooking, mutton was very low on the totem pole of likes. In fact, it was dislike. But here was the thing, is I've been told to go and buy sheep, not sheep, but goat. That will more replicate the flavor of the mutton that I remember as a kid. And I'm still trying to get just true mutton to find out for myself. But anyway, that was my question.
I hope you find it, Kathy.
Get a young goat. Don't get an old goat.
Oh, there's a talk. Yeah.
It'll never get done, and you can spend 24 hours cooking it, and it still won't taste right. So get a young goat. 17 to 18
Folks,
pounds.
if there's one thing you take away from this chat, get a young goat. I'm just realizing that
and by the way, we need to hear your music.
Yeah, I was going to say
one of our, cherries on the Sunday.
Totally. I think what we're going to do is, we've gone way over. I think we'll go out with the music. So first off, my mom and I will. Yeah, thank you all. We'll sign off first. Thank you all so much. It is truly an honor to get to present to you all, and what lovely questions, and such a pleasure. So thank you so much for being here and for hosting us, and Colleen for inviting us via Scott and Kathy, and really, really pleased to be here. Thank you all. Also, feel free to sign out if you don't want to listen to any music, but I'm going to now share my screen and play a Chicago-oriented song that my band has written. I play in a folk band called Darling Side, which we're on Spotify and YouTube and all of the things. This is going to be a YouTube animated music video that we did.
How do you spell Darling Side?
Yeah, DARLINGSIDE, all one word. And you'll see it, I think, in the YouTube video. Yeah, Darling Side right here. Oh, I'll share my. I should mention also that the reason that we have a song about Chicago is that one of my bandmates, Harris, our cellist, is from Glencoe, and so he grew up in Chicago. A lot of fond memories, and it was easy to get him to sign off on songs when we sung about Chicago. So it was a trick that we did often. He thinks he was tricking us, but really we were tricking him, and that's how collaborative songwriting works, folks. Thank you all so much again. We will
Thank you.
sign off and not talk again after the video. But yeah, take care. Thank you very much. And this is White Horses.
Thank you so much.
Sitting on the ledge outside the second floor, you can hear the sirens running up the road. White horses for Chicago, black water brings me back. Looking for a trace of orchard underground, growing in the basements beneath a brand new town. White horses for Chicago, black water brings me back. It's about the same. I'm swimming in my dreams across the lake, in second place. Come the winter, I'm driving blind, a tuxedo, doing donuts on the ice. Black and white on white. It doesn't matter if I sleep or follow it out of bed. That in the morning it's water in my head. White horses for Chicago.